The Valorian Conclave had known peace for 12,000 years, and in that long stretch of time they had built wonders that lesser civilizations could only dream about. They had mastered the art of healing. They had created music that could make entire species weep with joy. And they had learned to travel between stars as easily as walking between rooms in a house. But they had never learned how to fight. And now that weakness was going to kill them all. Ambassador Yethril stood in the command center of Relay Station 17, her four-jointed legs trembling beneath her as she watched the screens fill with fire and death. The Sketh Dominion had come without warning, their hive fleets pouring out of dark space like a plague of hungry insects, and everywhere they touched, life ended. She was old by Valorian standards, her pale blue fur now streaked with silver, and she had spent her entire life believing that peace was the natural state of the universe. She had been wrong, and that mistake was now costing her people everything. Ambassador, called out her assistant Corveth, a young male whose voice cracked with terror. Station 12 has gone silent, and Station 14 is not responding to our signals anymore. Yethril closed her large dark eyes for a moment, and tried to steady her racing hearts. 3 of the 7 species in the Conclave had already lost their homeworlds, billions of souls snuffed out in a matter of days, and the Sketh showed no signs of slowing down. The Conclave had tried to negotiate, because that was what they knew how to do. They had offered resources, territory, even servitude, but the Sketh did not want to negotiate. The Sketh wanted only one thing, and that was to consume every living thing in their path. How many evacuation ships have launched? Yethril asked, forcing her voice to remain calm, even though every part of her wanted to scream. 437 vessels, carrying approximately 9 billion refugees, Corveth replied, his slender fingers dancing across the control panel. But the Sketh pursuit fleet is faster than our ships, and at current speeds, they will catch the convoy in 19 standard days. 19 days, Yethril thought. 19 days until the last hope of the Valorian Conclave was torn apart and devoured. She looked around the relay station at the handful of technicians and officers who had stayed behind to keep the communication systems running. They all knew they were going to die here, that the Sketh would reach this station long before they could escape. But they had stayed anyway because someone had to send the warnings. Someone had to guide the evacuation ships. Someone had to try. Open a channel, Yethril said suddenly, a desperate idea forming in her mind. Open every channel we have, every frequency, every band, broadcast as far as our equipment can reach. Corveth looked at her with confusion in his round eyes. Ambassador, we have already sent distress calls to every member of the Galactic Registry, and none of them are willing to help. They are all too afraid of the Sketh. They would rather hide and hope the swarm does not come for them next. I know, Yethril replied, moving toward the main transmission console with a determination she did not truly feel. But there are other frequencies, other channels that we have been told never to use. The young assistant's fur rippled with alarm as he understood what she was suggesting. You mean the restricted bands, the ones marked as dangerous in every archive and database. Ambassador, those frequencies are flagged for a reason. The species that use them are classified as... I know what they are classified as, Yethril interrupted, her voice sharp with desperation. Deathworlders, apex predators, dangerous and unpredictable organisms from planets so hostile that the rest of the galaxy cannot understand how anything survives there. I have read the warnings, Corveth. I have seen the files, marked with symbols that tell us to stay away and never make contact. She reached the console and began adjusting the transmission parameters with trembling limbs. But right now, at this moment, the peaceful species of the galaxy have abandoned us. The civilized species have decided that their own survival matters more than ours. And the only ones who might be willing to fight are the ones we have been taught to fear. Corveth took a step back, his ears flattening against his head in a gesture of deep unease. There is one species in particular that the archives warn about most strongly. They come from a small blue planet orbiting a yellow star, a world of crushing gravity and toxic atmosphere, of extreme temperatures and constant natural disasters. The species calls themselves humans, and every report says the same thing: avoid contact at all costs. Yethril had read those reports too. She had seen the images of Earth, a planet where the very air could poison you, where the water could drown you, where predators lurked in every shadow, and the ground itself could shake and swallow cities whole. She had read about humans and their strange persistence, their refusal to die even when everything in the universe seemed designed to kill them. "They are monsters," Corveth whispered. "The archives say they hunt for pleasure. They fight wars against each other for reasons no other species can understand. They consume the flesh of other creatures and call it normal. Ambassador, even if they answered our call, how do we know they would not simply join the Sketh in destroying us?" Yethril paused for a moment, her limbs hovering over the controls, and she thought about everything she had learned in her long life. She thought about how the Conclave had always believed that violence was primitive, that civilized beings had evolved beyond such things, that peace was the highest achievement any species could reach. But peace had not saved them. Diplomacy had not saved them. All their knowledge and wisdom and culture had not saved them. "I do not know what the humans will do," Yethril admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I do not know if they are truly the monsters the archives describe, or if they are something else entirely. But I know that we are dying, Corveth. I know that the Sketh will not stop until every member of the Conclave has been consumed. And I know that no one else in this galaxy is willing to stand against them." She activated the transmission array and felt the station hum with power as it prepared to send her message across the vast emptiness of space. "So I am going to ask the monsters for help, because the monsters are all we have left." The message she composed was simple, stripped of all the formal diplomatic language she had spent her career mastering. There was no time for ceremony, no time for careful wording designed to avoid offense. There was only the truth. "We are the Valorian Conclave," she spoke into the transmitter, her voice carrying across frequencies that had been silent for centuries. "We are a coalition of 7 peaceful species, and we are being exterminated by an enemy we cannot fight. Our worlds are burning, our people are dying, and we have nowhere left to run. We are sending this message to anyone who can hear it, anyone who might be willing to help, anyone who still believes that innocent lives are worth saving. Please, if you are out there, if you can hear us, we are begging you, help us." She ended the transmission and stood in silence, listening to the soft hum of the equipment and the distant rumble of the station's failing shields. Corveth looked at her, with eyes full of fear, and something that might have been hope. "Do you think they will answer?" Before Yethril could respond, a junior technician at one of the monitoring stations suddenly gasped and turned toward them with an expression of pure disbelief. "Ambassador, I am receiving a response on the Deathworld frequency. The signal is coming from the restricted sector, from the system with the yellow star." Yethril felt her heart stop beating for a moment. "What does it say?" The technician's voice trembled as he read the translation appearing on his screen. "Message received. Help is coming. Hold on. C.P." 47 minutes had passed since Yethril had sent her desperate plea into the void, and something from Earth had answered. She did not know whether to feel relief or terror, but she knew that everything was about to change. The message arrived at United Earth Command headquarters at exactly 3:42 in the morning, Greenwich Mean Time, and within seconds it had set off alarms in 17 different government facilities around the planet. This was not a drill, this was not a test, this was first contact with an alien civilization, and that civilization was begging for help. Admiral Chen Wei had been asleep in his quarters when his personal communicator began screaming with emergency alerts. And by the time he reached the command center, his hair was still uncombed and his uniform was hastily buttoned. None of that mattered, because the screens on every wall were showing him something that made his heart pound with a mixture of excitement and dread. "Play it again," he ordered, and the room fell silent as the alien voice filled the air once more. The translation software had done its work quickly, converting the strange sounds into words that every human in the room could understand. And those words painted a picture of horror that made even the most hardened military officers shift uncomfortably in their seats. An entire civilization was being slaughtered. Billions of innocent beings were dying, and they had reached out to Earth as their last hope. "How did they know to contact us?" asked General Morrison, a tall woman with gray hair and sharp eyes who commanded the Ground Forces Division. "They used a frequency that has been silent for as long as we have been monitoring space," replied the communications officer, a young man whose fingers flew across his keyboard as he analyzed the signal. "According to our databases, this frequency was designated for Deathworld species only, and apparently the rest of the galaxy has been avoiding it because they are afraid of us." Admiral Chen let that information sink in for a moment. Humanity had always wondered if they were alone in the universe, and now they had their answer. They were not alone, but the rest of the universe had been deliberately ignoring them because they considered humans too dangerous to approach. "They must be truly desperate," General Morrison said quietly, "to reach out to the species they fear most." "They are," Chen replied, studying the tactical data that was now appearing on the main display. "This Sketh Dominion they mentioned appears to be some kind of aggressive hive mind species, and based on the information embedded in the distress signal, they have already destroyed multiple homeworlds. The refugee convoy the Valorians mentioned is all that remains of their civilization." The room erupted in murmured conversations as officers debated what this meant and what should be done. But Chen raised his hand for silence and turned to face his assembled staff with an expression of grim determination. "I am calling an emergency session of the Coalition Council," he announced, "and I want every available ship commander on standby. We have a decision to make, and we need to make it fast." The Coalition Council met 6 hours later in a secure bunker beneath the Swiss Alps, and the debate that followed was one of the most intense in human history. Representatives from every nation on Earth argued about what humanity should do with this information. Some said they should ignore the call, that Earth had enough problems of its own, and that getting involved in an alien war would be foolish. Others worried that this was some kind of trap, that the message had been designed to lure humanity into a conflict that would destroy them. A few even suggested that Earth should try to make contact with this Sketh Dominion instead, to see if they could negotiate some kind of peace. But then Captain Mira Okonkwo stood up to speak. She was not supposed to be at this meeting. She was just a ship captain, commander of the heavy assault carrier UES Perseverance, and she had no official role in political discussions. But someone had invited her to observe, and when she raised her hand to speak, the room fell quiet, because everyone knew her reputation. Mira Okonkwo had grown up in Lagos, Nigeria, and she had joined the military at 18 because she wanted to protect people. She had risen through the ranks, not because of political connections or family influence, but because she was the best at what she did. Her crew loved her, her superiors trusted her, and her enemies feared her. "I have listened to all of your arguments," she said, her voice calm, but carrying easily through the chamber. "And I understand the concerns about resources and risks and the possibility that this could be a trap. But I want you all to think about something for a moment." She walked to the center of the room and looked around at the assembled leaders of humanity. Somewhere out there, right now, there are 9 billion living beings running for their lives. They are mothers carrying children. They are elders who have seen generations come and go. They are young people who have never known anything but fear. And they sent a message into the dark, asking if anyone would help them. Her eyes were hard as she continued. They did not ask for weapons or resources. They did not demand that we sacrifice ourselves for them. They simply asked if anyone out there still believed that innocent lives were worth saving. And we are sitting here debating whether it is convenient for us to answer. The Chinese representative spoke up, his voice skeptical. Captain Okonkwo, your passion is admirable, but we must be practical. We do not know these aliens. We do not know their culture or their intentions, and we certainly do not know if we can trust them. Why should humanity risk everything for strangers? Mira smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Because that is what humans do. That is what has always made us different from the animals we evolved alongside. When we see someone drowning, we jump in to save them, even if we cannot swim. When we see a child in danger, we run toward the threat instead of away from it. When we hear someone crying for help in the darkness, we answer. They have read their reports and seen their data, and decided that humans are too violent, too aggressive, too dangerous to approach. But they do not understand what all that violence and aggression is for. Her voice rose with conviction. We are not predators because we enjoy causing pain. We are predators because the universe taught us that if you want to protect the things you love, you have to be willing to fight for them. We did not climb to the top of our food chain by being passive. We got there by refusing to give up, by adapting to every challenge, by looking at impossible odds and saying, I will find a way. Admiral Chen was watching her with something like pride in his eyes, and around the room other officers were nodding in agreement. The Valorians called us because they are out of options, Mira concluded, and maybe they will regret it. Maybe they will look at us and see the monsters their archives described. But I would rather be a monster who saves innocent lives than a civilized being who lets them die because it was not convenient to help. The vote that followed was not unanimous, but it did not need to be. The majority agreed that humanity would answer the call, and within hours the mobilization began. Captain Okonkwo returned to her ship and assembled her crew in the main hangar bay. They stood in neat rows, men and women from every nation on Earth, all of them watching her with anticipation and trust. I'm not going to lie to you, she told them. This mission is going to be dangerous. We are going to travel further from home than any human has ever gone. We are going to face an enemy we know almost nothing about, and there is a very good chance that some of us will not come back. This is a volunteer mission only, and anyone who does not want to go can walk away right now with no judgment and no consequences. She paused and looked at the faces before her, seeing fear and determination in equal measure. But I also want you to know why we are doing this. Somewhere out there, people are dying, and they asked us for help. That is all the reason I have ever needed to fight, and I think it is all the reason you need too. Not a single person moved, not a single hand was raised to request transfer. Every member of the crew stood firm and ready. Across Earth, the same scene was playing out on ships and in military bases, as word spread about what was happening and what humanity was going to do. Volunteers came from everywhere, soldiers and doctors and engineers and pilots, all of them stepping forward because they had heard the call and could not ignore it. The fleet that assembled at the edge of the solar system was not beautiful by galactic standards. The ships were angular and scarred, covered in armor plating and bristling with weapons that other species had abandoned centuries ago as too brutal. They were not elegant or sophisticated. They were tools built for one purpose: to protect. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked out at the armada. 17 warships and 42 support vessels, carrying over 200,000 human beings who had chosen to cross the stars for strangers they had never met. The galaxy called us monsters, he said quietly to his first officer. They wrote warnings about us in their databases, and told everyone to stay away. I think it is time we showed them what kind of monsters we really are. The fleet engaged their engines and leaped into the void, racing toward a desperate people who had gambled everything on a single hope that the most dangerous species in the galaxy might also be the most willing to help. 19 days of running had broken something inside Ambassador Yethril, and she could see the same brokenness reflected in the eyes of everyone aboard the evacuation ship Gentle Dawn. They had watched their homeworld burn on the long-range sensors. They had listened to the final transmissions from stations that went silent one by one, and they had counted the hours until the Sketh pursuit fleet caught up with them. The convoy had started with 437 ships, but now only 312 remained. The others had fallen behind due to engine failures or had been caught by the faster Sketh scout vessels that nipped at the edges of the refugee fleet like predators wearing down a herd. Yethril stood on the bridge of the Gentle Dawn, surrounded by officers who had given up hope days ago, but continued to perform their duties because they did not know what else to do. The main view screen showed the star field ahead of them, and somewhere in that vast emptiness was the Deathworld species that had promised to help. "Do you really believe they are coming?" asked Captain Valoris, the ship's commander, his voice hollow with exhaustion. Yethril did not answer immediately. She had replayed the human response in her mind thousands of times since receiving it, trying to understand the tone and meaning behind those simple words. Help is coming. Hold on. And she still was not sure if she had made the right choice. "I believe they said they would come," she finally replied, "and I believe that was our only chance." The tactical officer suddenly straightened at his station, his ears perking up in a way that meant either very good news or very bad news. "Ambassador, I am detecting multiple hyperspace signatures directly ahead of us. Something is dropping out of faster-than-light travel approximately 50,000 kilometers from our position." The bridge crew froze, and Yethril felt her hearts begin to race. The Sketh had never attacked from the front before. They had always come from behind, chasing and wearing down the convoy. If they had somehow gotten ahead of the refugee fleet, it would mean the end of everything. "How many signatures?" Captain Valoris demanded, his limbs already moving toward the emergency protocols. 17 large vessels and 42 smaller ones, the tactical officer reported, his voice trembling. "They do not match any Sketh profiles in our database." A wave of murmurs swept through the bridge as the crew tried to process this information, and then the communication console began blinking with an incoming transmission on a frequency that Yethril recognized immediately. It was the same Deathworld channel she had used to send her distress call. "Put it through," she ordered, and the bridge speakers crackled with a voice that was deeper and rougher than any Valorian throat could produce. "Valorian Conclave, this is Captain Mira Okonkwo of the United Earth ship, Perseverance. We received your distress call and have traveled from our homeworld to provide assistance. Please confirm your status and the location of the pursuing enemy fleet." The bridge was silent for a long moment as everyone stared at the view screen, where the human ships were now becoming visible. Angular vessels covered in dark armor, bristling with weapon systems that looked crude but somehow terrifying. Nothing like the smooth, elegant lines of Conclave technology. "They came," Valoris whispered, his voice filled with disbelief. "They actually came." Yethril moved to the communication console, her limbs feeling weak, but her spirits suddenly lifted by something she had almost forgotten how to feel: hope. "Captain Okonkwo, this is Ambassador Yethril of the Valorian Conclave. I cannot express how grateful we are that you have answered our call. The Sketh pursuit fleet is approximately 6 hours behind us, consisting of an estimated 140 hive ships and countless smaller attack craft." There was a pause before the human captain responded, and when she did, her voice carried a tone that Yethril's translator struggled to interpret. It was calm, almost casual, as if facing a fleet that outnumbered her own 8-1 was not a cause for concern. Understood, Ambassador. We are going to position our ships between your convoy and the approaching enemy. I need you to keep moving forward at maximum speed and do not stop for anything. We will handle the Sketh. Captain Valoris looked at Yethril with wide eyes. Did she just say they would handle them? Does she understand the numbers we are talking about? Before Yethril could respond, the tactical officer called out another alert. The Sketh fleet has increased speed. They must have detected the new arrivals. They will reach our position in 4 hours instead of 6. The human captain's voice came through the speakers again, and this time there was something different in it. Something that made the fur on Yethril's neck stand up. All human vessels, this is Captain Okonkwo. The enemy is accelerating toward the refugee convoy. All ships move to intercept Formation Alpha. We are going to buy these people time to escape, and we are going to make the Sketh regret ever hearing the name humanity. A chorus of acknowledgments came through the communication channel. Dozens of human voices responding with phrases like, "Copy that," and "Ready to engage," and "Let them come." And Yethril realized she was hearing something she had never encountered before. A species that was not afraid of battle, a species that seemed to welcome it. The human fleet did not form a defensive line. Instead, they began moving forward, toward the approaching Sketh, their engines flaring with power as they accelerated into the path of the oncoming storm. "What are they doing?" Valoris asked, his voice rising with alarm. "They should be positioning for defense. They should be trying to protect the convoy. Why are they attacking?" Yethril watched the tactical display as the human ships spread out into an aggressive formation, and she remembered something she had read in the archives about Deathworld predators. They did not wait for prey to come to them. They went out to meet it. "I do not think humans know how to fight defensively," she said softly, more to herself than to anyone else. The Sketh hive commander must have been just as confused as the Valorian officers, because a broadcast suddenly came through on all frequencies. The harsh clicking language of the Dominion, translated by the ship's computer, into words that made Yethril shudder. "You are interfering with Dominion expansion. The prey species you are protecting has been marked for consumption. Surrender them to us, and you may leave. Resistance is inefficient and will result in your destruction." Every being on the bridge of the Gentle Dawn waited to hear how the humans would respond to this threat, this ultimatum from a species that had conquered hundreds of worlds and never known defeat. Captain Okonkwo's reply was broadcast on the same open channel, her voice steady and hard as steel. "This is Captain Mira Okonkwo of Earth. The people behind us have asked for our protection, and we have given it. You want them? You come through us." The Sketh hive commander seemed to hesitate, as if processing this unexpected response, and then its voice came again, filled with what might have been curiosity. "You are not conclave species. Our sensors indicate your biology is different. Your ships are primitive. Your numbers are insufficient. Why do you interfere in matters that do not concern you?" "Because they asked for help," Okonkwo replied, "and we were able to give it. That is all the reason humans have ever needed." Yethril felt something shift in her understanding of the universe at that moment. She had spent her entire life believing that civilized beings acted out of self-interest, that alliances were formed for mutual benefit, that no species would ever risk themselves for strangers without expecting something in return. But these humans had crossed the galaxy to fight and die for people they had never met, simply because those people had asked. The Sketh commander's response was immediate and hostile. "Your reasoning is illogical. You gain nothing from this interference. We will consume you along with the prey species, and your homeworld will be next." On the view screen, Yethril could see the Sketh fleet emerging from the darkness of space. Hundreds of ships that looked like living things, their hulls covered in organic armor and pulsing with bioluminescent patterns. They were beautiful in a terrible way, like poisonous creatures that lured victims close before striking. The human ships looked tiny in comparison, their metal hulls dull and scarred, their weapon systems visible as crude projections rather than elegant integrated designs. By every measure that Yethril understood, the humans were outmatched, outgunned, and doomed. But they did not retreat. "Ambassador," came Captain Okonkwo's voice one more time, "I need you to get your convoy moving now. Do not look back. Do not slow down. Just run. We will hold them here as long as we can." "Captain," Yethril replied, her voice thick with emotion, "you do not have to do this. You can retreat with us. You have already shown more courage than any species in the galaxy. You do not have to die for us." There was a moment of silence, and then Okonkwo spoke again, and her voice was warm despite the approaching death. "Ambassador, I have a daughter back on Earth. Her name is Adaeze, and she is 7 years old. When she asked me why I was leaving, I told her that some people far away needed help, and that helping people is what good humans do. I cannot go home and tell her I ran away when things got difficult." Yethril closed her eyes and felt tears running down her fur. "I will remember you, Captain. The Conclave will remember what you did here." "Then make it count," Okonkwo replied. "Now go, and do not stop until you are safe." The Gentle Dawn's engines roared to life as the convoy began accelerating away from the battlefield, and through the rear sensors, Yethril watched as the human fleet formed a wall of metal and determination between the refugees and the approaching swarm. The first shots were fired moments later, and the Battle of Valorian's Gap began. The Sketh hive mind had consumed 1,143 species across 4,000 years of expansion, and in all that time, it had never encountered anything like the humans. These strange, soft-bodied creatures from a poisonous world did not behave the way prey was supposed to behave, and the hive mind found itself experiencing something it had not felt in millennia: uncertainty. The battle began with the Sketh assuming it would be quick and efficient. The human ships were outnumbered 8-1. Their technology was clearly primitive, and their tactics seemed to be based on nothing more than aggression. The hive mind calculated that the engagement would last approximately 47 minutes before all resistance was eliminated. That calculation proved to be spectacularly wrong. Captain Okonkwo stood on the bridge of the Perseverance as the first wave of Sketh attack craft swarmed toward her fleet, and she watched the targeting displays with the calm focus of someone who had spent her entire life preparing for exactly this kind of moment. "All batteries, fire at will," she ordered, and the human ships erupted with violence. The Sketh had expected energy weapons, the clean, precise beams that most civilized species used. Instead, they were met with kinetic projectiles, massive metal slugs accelerated to incredible velocities that tore through organic armor like paper. They were met with explosive warheads that detonated inside their ships and scattered burning debris across the void. They were met with weapons that the rest of the galaxy had abandoned as too destructive, too messy, too barbaric. The first wave of attack craft was annihilated in seconds. The hive mind reeled from the sudden loss of thousands of connected organisms, and for a moment, the entire Sketh fleet hesitated as the collective consciousness tried to process what had just happened. In that moment of hesitation, the human ships did something that defied all tactical logic. They charged forward. "All ships advance and engage," Okonkwo commanded. "Do not give them time to regroup. Do not let them establish formation. We hit them hard, and we keep hitting them until they break, or we do." The Sketh had never fought an enemy that attacked when outnumbered. Their experience was with species that fled or surrendered, species that valued their own survival above all else. But these humans seemed to have no regard for their own lives, seemed to believe that dying while fighting was preferable to living while running. The battle became chaos. Human ships dove into the swarm, with engines burning at maximum. their crews ignoring damage that would have crippled any conclave vessel. When shields failed, they kept fighting. When hull breaches opened, they sealed the compartments and kept fighting. When weapon systems went offline, they rammed their ships into enemy vessels and detonated their reactors. Sergeant Elena Torres was part of the Marine force assigned to board the Sketh command node, a living ship the size of a small moon that served as the central hub of the hive mind's local consciousness. If they could destroy it, the entire fleet would be thrown into disarray. The boarding pods crashed through the organic hull of the command node, and Torres led her squad into a nightmare landscape of pulsing walls and bioluminescent corridors filled with Sketh warriors. The creatures were horrifying, six-limbed insectoid beings with mandibles that could cut through armor and acidic blood that burned through flesh. "Contact front," Torres shouted, raising her rifle and firing a burst that dropped the first Sketh warrior before it could reach her squad. "Keep moving. We have to reach the central cortex." The Marines fought their way through the living ship, room by room and corridor by corridor. They took casualties, good soldiers who fell to Sketh claws and acid, and the crushing pressure of being inside an enemy that could reshape itself to trap them. But they did not stop, did not retreat, did not consider surrender. Torres was hit twice in the first hour, once in the shoulder and once in the thigh, but she bound her wounds with battlefold dressings and kept moving. The combat stimulants pumping through her system kept the pain manageable, kept her focused, kept her fighting. "How much further?" asked Private Chen, a young soldier from Shanghai who was carrying the demolition charges they needed to destroy the central cortex. Torres checked her tactical display and grimaced. 2 more kilometers through hostile territory, and the ship is adapting to our presence. The walls are getting thicker, and the corridors are trying to close around us. Then we move faster, she said, and pushed forward into the darkness. The Sketh command node was not just a ship, it was a living extension of the hive mind itself, and it could feel the humans moving through its body like a disease. It tried to crush them with closing walls, tried to drown them with acidic fluids, tried to overwhelm them with wave after wave of warriors, but the humans would not die. They fought for 18 hours straight, rotating sleep in 15-minute shifts while the others provided cover. They consumed combat rations that would have poisoned any Valorian stomach. They pushed their bodies beyond limits that the hive mind had not believed possible for carbon-based organisms. And slowly, impossibly, they advanced. Outside the command node, the space battle had become a grinding war of attrition that favored neither side. The humans had lost 7 ships, and were fighting with the remaining 10, each one damaged, but still operational. The Sketh had lost 63 hive ships, but still outnumbered the humans. And the hive mind was beginning to understand that numbers alone would not win this fight. The human ships refused to break formation, refused to retreat, refused to acknowledge that they were losing. Every time a Sketh ship managed to cripple a human vessel, the crew would fight to the last breath, often self-destructing their reactor to take enemy ships with them. Why do they not surrender? The hive mind asked itself, a question it had never needed to consider before. Why do they continue to fight when victory is impossible? What do they gain from this resistance? On the bridge of a crippled destroyer, Lieutenant Commander James Wright sat in his command chair, with blood running down his face from a head wound that he had not had time to treat. His ship had lost main power, life support was failing, and Sketh boarding parties were cutting through the hull. "All hands, this is the captain," he said into the ship-wide communicator. "It has been an honor serving with you. For those still able to fight, report to the armory and prepare to repel boarders. We are not going to make this easy for them." The crew of the dying ship grabbed whatever weapons they could find: rifles, pistols, knives, fire extinguishers, bare fists, and positioned themselves at every entrance point. When the Sketh warriors finally broke through, They found not frightened prey waiting to be consumed, but angry humans waiting to make them pay for every inch. Lieutenant Commander Wright died with his hands around the throat of a Sketh commander, refusing to let go even as the creature's claws tore through his chest. Inside the command node, Sergeant Torres finally reached the central cortex with the remnants of her squad. Only 8 Marines remained out of the 40 who had started the mission, and all of them were wounded. The cortex was a massive chamber filled with neural tissue that pulsed with the thoughts of the hive mind, and destroying it would cripple the Sketh fleet. But standing between the Marines and their objective was an army of Sketh warriors. Hundreds of them crowded into the chamber to protect the heart of their collective consciousness. Torres looked at her squad, at the exhausted, blood-covered soldiers who had followed her through hell, and she saw no fear in their eyes, only determination. "We came here to do a job," she said, her voice hoarse from shouting orders and breathing recycled air for 18 hours. "And we are going to do it. Chen, get those charges ready. Everyone else, cover him." The final assault was brutal and close and desperate. The Marines formed a protective circle around Chen as he worked on the demolition charges, fighting hand-to-hand with Sketh warriors who kept coming and coming and never seemed to end. They used their rifles as clubs when the ammunition ran out, used their knives when the rifles broke, used their fists and teeth and sheer stubborn human refusal to die. Torres took a Sketh claw through her side and felt something important tear inside her, but she kept fighting, kept killing, kept protecting her people. "Charge is set," Chen shouted. 30 seconds to detonation. "Everyone out," Torres ordered, and the surviving Marines began fighting their way toward the extraction point. She stayed behind to cover their retreat, because someone had to. The explosion that destroyed the central cortex also destroyed Sergeant Elena Torres, but not before she had ensured that her squad made it to safety. The effect on the Sketh fleet was immediate and devastating. Without the command node coordinating their actions, the hive ships began acting independently, their attacks becoming uncoordinated and confused. The human fleet, battered but unbroken, pressed their advantage. Captain Okonkwo watched the Sketh formation dissolve into chaos and allowed herself a moment of grim satisfaction. "All ships press the attack. Do not let them regroup. Today we show the galaxy what happens when you threaten innocent people." The Battle of Valorian's Gap lasted for 37 hours, and when it was over, the Sketh Dominion had suffered the first defeat in its 4,000-year history. They had not been destroyed. They still outnumbered the humans even after their losses, but something inside the hive mind had changed. For the first time, the Sketh knew fear. The Sketh Dominion retreated. Those 4 words spread across the galaxy faster than any ship could travel, carried on communication relays, and whispered in space stations, and repeated in disbelief by species that had spent generations living in terror of the hive mind's expansion. The Sketh had never retreated, had never been defeated, had never encountered anything that could make them feel the fear they inflicted on others. But they retreated from the humans. The hive mind had made a calculation during the final hours of the Battle of Valorian's Gap, a calculation based on everything it had observed about this strange species from the poisonous blue world. The humans had lost 11 of their 17 warships. They had suffered casualties that would have broken any other species. They had every reason to accept a draw and let the Sketh withdraw with their remaining forces. Instead, they had kept attacking. The hive mind had analyzed the patterns of human behavior and reached a terrifying conclusion. These creatures would not stop. They would rebuild their fleet and come back. They would hunt the Sketh across the galaxy. They would fight until every human was dead, and then their children would continue the fight. Victory against such an enemy was not impossible, but it would cost the Dominion everything. It was not worth it. The The Sketh withdrew to their core territories, and for the first time in 4,000 years, the expansion stopped. Ambassador Yethril stood on the observation deck of the Gentle Dawn and watched the human fleet limp toward the convoy. Only 6 warships remained operational, and all of them were damaged almost beyond recognition. They had won an impossible victory, but the cost had been staggering. "How many?" she asked Captain Okonkwo when the human officer's image appeared on her communication screen. Okonkwo looked exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. There were shadows under her eyes and lines on her face that had not been there before the battle. 112,000 casualties, including 67,000 dead. "We lost 11 ships and their entire crews." Yethril felt her heart's ache at the numbers. "You lost so many, for people you had never met." "We gained something too," Okonkwo replied, and despite her exhaustion, there was warmth in her voice. "We gained 8 billion new friends, and we showed the galaxy that humanity keeps its promises." The journey to safety took another 3 weeks, and during that time, Yethril spent many hours talking with the humans, trying to understand these strange beings who had crossed the stars to die for strangers. She learned about Earth, about its crushing gravity and toxic atmosphere, about the predators and natural disasters that had shaped humanity into what it was. She learned about their history of violence, their endless wars against each other, and how they had somehow managed to unite when faced with a threat to others. "I do not understand," she admitted to Captain Okonkwo during one of their conversations. "Your species spent most of its history fighting among yourselves, killing each other over territory and resources and ideas. How did you manage to set all of that aside to help us?" Okonkwo smiled, and it was a sad smile that spoke of hard truths learned over centuries of human existence. "We fight each other because we care too much, Ambassador. We argue and struggle and sometimes even kill because we believe in things strongly enough to die for them. And when we saw your people being destroyed by an enemy that did not care about anything except consumption, we realized that all our petty disagreements did not matter. There was a real threat, a real evil, and we could either let it win, or we could show the universe what humans are truly capable of." The Valorian Conclave found a new home eventually, a planet in a system that had been surveyed but never colonized because it was considered too harsh for any civilized species. It had strong gravity and extreme weather, and required constant effort just to survive. But the humans helped them adapt, taught them how to build structures that could withstand the conditions, taught them how to grow food in difficult soil, taught them how to thrive in a hostile environment. 3 years after the Battle of Valorian's Gap, the newly formed Galactic Assembly held its first meeting, and for the first time in history, humans were invited to participate. They sat in a chamber filled with representatives from dozens of species, most of whom had avoided contact with Earth for as long as records existed. Ambassador Yethril was asked to give testimony about what had happened, and she stood before the assembled representatives with memories of fire and fear and hope burning in her mind. "We called them monsters," she began, her voice carrying through the silent chamber. "Our archives called Earth a Deathworld, a place of poison and violence and danger. We were told that humans were aggressive, unpredictable, and potentially hostile to all other forms of life. We were warned never to make contact, never to draw their attention, never to give them a reason to turn their predatory nature toward us." She paused and looked around at the assembled beings, seeing fear and curiosity and cautious hope in their varied faces. "We were right about all of it. Humans are aggressive. They are unpredictable. They are capable of violence that would make most of us faint with horror. Their planet is a nightmare of extremes that no sensible species would choose to inhabit. And they have spent most of their history finding new and creative ways to kill each other. The Velastian delegates shifted uncomfortably, and several other representatives exchanged worried glances. This was not the testimonial they had expected. But we did not understand what all of that meant, Yethril continued, her voice growing stronger. We saw the violence and assumed it made them evil. We saw the aggression and assumed it would be turned against us. We saw the survival instincts of a Deathworld species and assumed they would make humans dangerous to everyone around them. She turned to face the human delegation, where Captain Okonkwo sat with the survivors of her fleet, still bearing the scars of the battle that had saved the Conclave. What we did not understand was that everything which makes humans dangerous also makes them protectors. They are violent because their world taught them that you must be willing to fight if you want to protect the things you love. They are aggressive because passivity on Earth meant death. They are unpredictable because rigidity could not survive on a planet that changed constantly. Her voice softened as she addressed the humans directly. You came for us. You crossed the void between stars to fight and die for people you had never met, species you had never encountered, a civilization that had been warned to avoid you at all costs. 67,000 of your people gave their lives so that 8 billion of ours could live. And when I asked your captain why, she gave me the simplest answer I have ever heard. Because we asked for help, and you were able to give it. The chamber was completely silent, and Yethril could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone present. The galaxy has spent thousands of years being afraid of Earth, she said, turning back to the full assembly. We have hidden from humans, avoided them, warned each other to stay away, and during all that time, while we were hiding in fear, the Sketh Dominion was growing, consuming, spreading across the stars. None of us had the courage to stop them. None of us were willing to sacrifice anything to protect the innocent. She raised her hand and pointed at the human delegation. These monsters from the Deathworld were the only ones willing to answer our call. They were the only ones who believed that innocent lives were worth fighting for. And they proved that everything we feared about them was true. Humans are the most dangerous species in the galaxy. A murmur of unease rippled through the chamber, but Yethril was not finished. Dangerous to those who threaten the weak, she clarified. Dangerous to those who prey on the innocent. Dangerous to those who believe that strength gives them the right to consume whoever they please. But to the rest of us, to those who simply want to live in peace, humanity is not a threat. She looked at Captain Okonkwo one more time, and the human woman met her gaze with eyes that held both sadness and pride. They are guardians. They are the wolves who stand between the flock and the darkness. And I believe that the galaxy should stop being afraid of them and start being grateful that they exist. The vote that followed changed the political structure of the known galaxy. Humans were granted full membership in the Galactic Assembly, and Earth was officially reclassified from a quarantined Deathworld to a protected homeworld of a founding member species. Captain Okonkwo returned to Earth 6 months later, to the daughter who had been waiting for her to come home. Adeze ran across the landing field and threw herself into her mother's arms, and Mira held her tight and cried for the first time since the battle. Did you help the people who needed you? Adeze asked, looking up at her mother with innocent eyes. Mira smiled through her tears and nodded. Yes, baby, we helped them, and they are safe now. Across the galaxy on dozens of worlds, beings of every shape and size looked up at the stars and thought about the blue planet orbiting that distant yellow sun. They thought about the Deathworld species that had answered a desperate call, that had fought and bled and died for strangers, that had proven that the most dangerous creatures in the universe could also be the most compassionate. The galaxy had called humanity monsters. They had not understood that Deathworlds produce more than just killers. They produce protectors. And now, the galaxy would never forget.